Airman, your National Chief, Alex Call.
Robert Michael Gates is an American statesman, scholar, and university president who served as the 22nd United States Secretary of Defense from 2006 to 2011. Prior to this, Gates served for 26 years in the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Council, and under President George H.W. Bush was director of the CIA. During this time, he also served as a member of the National Order of the Arrow Committee and as president of the National Eagle Scout Association. After leaving the CIA, Gates became president of Texas A&M University. In 2006, he was nominated by President George W. Bush as Secretary of Defense. In 2007, Time named Gates one of the year's most influential people. In 2008, Gates was named one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report. He continued to serve as Secretary of Defense in President Obama's administration until his retirement in 2011. President Obama presented Mr. Gates with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award, in recognition of his service. According to a Washington Post book review, he is widely considered the best defense secretary of the post-World War II era. Since his retirement from public service, Gates has served as the Chancellor of the College of William and Mary and is currently the National President of the Boy Scouts of America. Airmen, it is my distinct honor to welcome to the stage Dr. Robert M. Gates.
Well, the juggler is a hard act to follow. But then I juggled the Congress of the United States for a number of years. And I only dropped a few. Well, happy birthday to the Order of the Arrow. Looking out at all of you, I would say that this outfit is in excellent shape, despite its 100 years of age. First of all, apologies to those of you behind me, but to tell you the truth, the view from the front isn't that much better. 19 years ago, I spoke to the National Order of the Arrow Conference at Indiana University. I had recently retired as the director of Central Intelligence Agency, and as I began to speak, a wise guy airman way up in the cheap seats in the balcony yelled out, "Who killed President Kennedy?" And I slowly pointed up to the area where I heard his voice, and I said, "I know who you are, and I know where you live." Now, of course, I could have answered his question. But then I would have had to, For those of you who question the appropriateness of a former CIA director and defense secretary leading the Boy Scouts of America, Let me remind you that Lord Baden-Powell was both a soldier and a spy. He was a lieutenant general in the British Army, and he was a pioneer in the use of aerial reconnaissance. And as he would later write, and I quote, "For anyone tired of life, the thrilling life of a spy should be the very finest recuperator." I've been fortunate to receive a number of awards and honors over the years, but none have meant more to me to this day than becoming an Eagle Scout and being recognized with the Visual Honor of the Order of the Arrow. My memories of Scouting and of OA are vivid. After all these years, I remember as a kid in Kansas being taught by my scoutmaster how to cook in winter on a fire of dried cow chips, imparting a distinctive flavor to already nearly inedible food. Or serving on our council's pioneer camp in Colorado, a camp where the staff ate with patrols. The memory and taste of that food lingers still. Or when I and another airman were assigned by our OA Lodge in Kansas to publish a Kansas camping guide, and we bought all the paper before we wrote a word. 116,000 sheets of paper, all delivered to my parents' dining room. Or when I was an assistant scoutmaster in college in Williamsburg, Virginia, and we took a canoe trip. Down the Chickahominy River, roaring downstream at full speed, and very nearly ramming a very ripe dead cow floating in the river. It would have been an explosive experience. I remember my Order of the Arrow ordeal on a blazing hot July day in Kansas, and my vigil experience on a bitterly cold January night on the plains. As I sorted through an old box of Scouting and OA stuff before coming here, I found my original vigil certificate with my Indian name, Hylas Hudso, which translates as crazy medicine. A number of American presidents and other leaders here at home and abroad I worked with in the decades to come would, I'm sure, have found that entirely appropriate. I come here this evening not to talk to you about spies and satellites, of stealing secrets, of running covert wars as CIA director, or big wars in Iraq and Afghanistan as Secretary of Defense, or of heroes like our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Or of villains like Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. Although you would be astonished at the tales I could tell you. But I'm not here tonight to entertain you. Rather, I want to speak to you in all seriousness about the world, the future, and the role you must play in it. For as the conference theme states, it starts with us, meaning you. I speak to you this evening as a leader from one generation to the leaders of the next, young leaders on whom much will depend. The 20th century began in 1900, just a few years before Scouting and the Order of the Arrow were founded, a century that opened full of extraordinary hope, optimism, and promise. A time long ago when governments and peoples believed that they had become too civilized to make war on one another again. that bright optimism was quenched by the bloodiest century in human history. Perhaps 200 million lives lost through war, revolution, and oppression. In this still new century, the 21st century, your century, we see a world transformed. A world where its staggering cost in lives and treasure, all the ancient empires have disappeared. Where through 2 world wars and a bitter Cold War, through sacrifices beyond measure, the despotisms of Imperial Germany, Imperial Japan, and the totalitarianisms of Nazism and Soviet communism were defeated. We see a world today where, as never before, people are demanding peace, democracy, and an economic system that works. Over the last quarter of a century, we've seen the Soviet Union collapse, the Cold War end in our victory, Eastern Europe liberated and Germany reunified, and democracy advancing in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And yet, with all the change and all the promise, the world we see today is in many ways more turbulent, more unstable, more violent than the world we left behind us years ago. This is the world you will inherit. The Middle East, from Tunisia to Pakistan, is in flames. War consumes Libya, Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Violent Islamic extremists such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda recruit not just in the Middle East, but here in the United States and in Europe. And they seek to carry out attacks here and there. Iran foments instability in the region as it pursues a nuclear weapons capability, and religious conflict and persecution abounds. Russia has seized territory beyond its borders by force, and Vladimir Putin threatens the use of nuclear weapons in terms not heard since the darkest days of the Cold War. China's resurgent, challenging U.S. military dominance in the Western Pacific even as it steals our technology. Russia, China, North Korea, and others launch cyber attacks against American companies and against the American government. And tragically, many of these phenomena have a counterpart in our own country. Ethnic and racial conflict, terrorist attacks by Americans against Americans, governments seemingly unable to cope with the challenges that face society, extremism of every kind finding voice in violence. But there is another reality. For the first time in human history, people all over the world are seeking political freedom and economic opportunity. Through the internet and other modern technologies, the freedom to communicate, to share ideas is open to all. But to realize the opportunities created by political change and technological development, to address the challenges to peace and preserving freedom, we Americans must abandon the dream that as individuals and as a nation, we can put down the burdens and responsibilities of leadership at home and abroad. In a world of revolutionary change, of unprecedented hope side by side with instability and violence, what can we say about the future? The role that America will play in the years to come, and I believe the future of the world itself, will depend on the kind of people we 21st century Americans prove to be. And that means the kind of leaders you airmen will become, because it starts with you. If you are prepared to lead, to accept responsibility, to care about principles and causes beyond self-interest, to serve the public good, then the potential is bright for peace and for the expansion of freedom, democracy, and prosperity worldwide in the 21st century. There is no finer program for preparing young Americans for leadership at home and abroad than the Boy Scouts of America and the Order of the Arrow. When you first presented yourselves before Alawatsakima in preparation for your ordeal ceremony, the mighty chief warned you of the tests to come. The first was to spend a night alone to prove your courage and your ability to care for yourself. As symbolized in the ordeal ceremony, Scouting prepares boys and young men to meet challenges. It gives them confidence in their capabilities and experience in leadership. Scouting best teaches leadership and how to meet challenges in its programs oriented to the wilderness. And from the beginning, the Order of the Arrow has had as its purpose maintaining and promoting camping traditions and spirit. At a time when too many worry about American youth turning into couch potatoes, the prisoners of video and computer games, Scouting continues still to thrust boys and young men into the wilderness to prove themselves, to learn confidence and self-reliance, to learn about themselves, about nature, about powers greater than themselves, to learn about the power of the soul. As former Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas wrote a number of decades ago, if throughout time the youth of the nation accept the challenge the mountains offer, they will help keep alive in our people the spirit of adventure. That spirit is a measure of the vitality of both nations and men. A people who climb the ridges and sleep under the stars in high mountain meadows, who enter the forest and scale the peaks, who explore glaciers and walk ridges buried deep in snow, these people will give their country some of the indomitable spirit of the mountains. Scouting and the Order of the Arrow prepare young men for challenges, giving them self-awareness, the self-confidence that comes from meeting nature, meeting the wilderness on its own terms. And it starts with you. A second test in your ordeal, as disclosed by Alawatsakima, was to spend a day in laborious and arduous labor to prove your willingness to serve, highlighting Scouting's teaching of the importance of service to others. As you grow older, you will find yourselves surrounded by people of talent, power, influence, and wealth from many fields of endeavor. As you dream your own dreams of success and achievement and fulfillment, your experience in Scouting and in the Order of the Arrow should remind you always of the importance and the spiritual rewards of service. I entered public service nearly 50 years ago because when I was a college student, President Kennedy called upon young Americans to do so. Today, as when I was a scout and then a college student, President Kennedy's words still beckon to all young Americans when he said, "Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though embattled we are, but a call to bear the burdens of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself." The Scouting movement, the Order of the Arrow, show most dramatically that service to others, still calls forth the best among us to do battle with complacency, neglect, intolerance, and the emptiness of the spirit that are the common enemies of social peace and justice. This caring beyond self, this service to others, is fundamental to leadership. It is fundamental to Scouting and the Brotherhood of the Arrow. It is fundamental to democracy and to civilization itself. And it starts with you. The third test described by Lawatsakima was that you must eat freely to prove that you can subordinate the appetites of the body to the high purpose of the spirit. Values are essential to leadership. Values such as trustworthiness, loyalty, honesty, kindness, and the respect and dignity due each and every person. This is perhaps Scouting's and the Order's greatest contribution, teaching these values. Far too often, the large problems of our world, of our country, of our communities are traceable to individuals forgetting or never learning the simple virtues of the Scout law. Think how different things could be if others, like Scouts, would celebrate all we have in common while respecting our differences. As you look around the world and you see the many shapes of cruelty and oppression, as you look at our own country and your hometown, think if only people could practice the tolerance and justice and kindness and religious faith contained in the Scout oath and law. Yet when was the last time you heard a celebrity you like, someone from our pop culture, someone in a movie on iTunes or cable or MTV, speak of responsibility or honor or duty? There are in too many places too few people with Scouting values, people who say, on my honor, I will do my best to do my duty, and mean it. In all our lives, there are people who seek after wealth and the many kinds of power without regard to what is right or true or decent. And yet you here tonight, and countless others in Scouting and in the Order of the Arrow, demonstrate daily that Scouting offers an alternative, that a life based on principles, on faith, on personal honor, on Scouting values can be exciting, adventurous, fulfilling, and uplifting to an entire community and to a nation. And it starts with you. I worked for 8 presidents of the United States, 4 of them in the White House itself. I observed or worked with 14 secretaries of state, 13 secretaries of defense, 9 chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, 14 national security advisors, and more generals and admirals than I could count. Yet over nearly half a century of public service, I never found better insight into what truly makes a leader than in the ordeal ceremony of the Order of the Arrow. Self-confidence, self-awareness, and self-reliance, a spirit of cheerful service, and the importance of values, of virtue. In your ordeal ceremony, whether this summer or long ago, you heard the medicine man Mateu recount the legend of Chingachgook. In that legend, noble Uncas, son of the chief, volunteers for a dangerous mission, saying these words to his father: "If we would remain a nation, we must stand by one another. Let us both urge on our kindred firm devotion to our brethren and our cause. Ourselves forgetting, let us catch the higher vision. Let us find the greater beauty in the life of cheerful service." Grasp the legacy of Scouting and of the 100-year-old Order of the Arrow, and you will be fit leaders for the America of tomorrow. And America will continue to be the beacon of hope and decency and justice for the rest of the world. Grasp this legacy, and you will surely prevail in the struggle against hatred, intolerance, injustice, and empty souls here at home. In the days ahead, and for all your life long, be prepared. Be prepared to serve and to lead. After all, it starts with you. God bless you. God bless the Boy Scouts of America. God bless the Order of the Arrow. God bless America.